room is unmuted.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. We are quorate. You have apologies for absence, I believe.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Hall, and we also have apologies from Councillor Latif with Councillor Brownie as substitute. Probably nobody heard that on the live stream though.
Okay, thanks a lot. Any declarations of interest?
None, Chair.
No, thank you. So let's, is it Adrian presenting from Ernst & Young? Can you please give us a progress report on how you're getting on?
Yeah, so thanks, Chair. So this is just a verbal update in terms of just giving a committee an update in terms of where we are with the 2021-22 audit. So we recommenced the audit work back at the end of August. We've now been in with Bill and his team for the last month or so. We're having weekly catch-ups with Bill. We had one earlier today just to go through a priority list of areas that we'd like to kind of finish and other areas that we're working on over the next few months. Just to give an update to the council, so just by way of an update to the accounts. So the group accounts have now been updated following the finalisation of a number of the subsidiary accounts during the summer. So we're working through those areas. There's also been updates to the pension disclosures as well from the draft accounts. So that reflects figures that have changed as a result of the triennial valuation and some of the update to assumptions. And there's some other areas of update around collection fund, HRA, and some of the other disclosures. So working through those changes to get assurance, and also hopefully we'll be in a position to report back to the next committee, which I think is either the end of October or early November, where we'll bring a substantive audit results report. Hopefully we'll be in a position to kind of move towards the conclusion of the 21-22 audit over the next few months. We have a meeting with Bill and Nigel on Monday next week, just to update them on some of the other issues going on within the wider sector. I think at the last committee I talked about some of the moves within DLUC and kind of the FRC with a view to trying to reset the local audit market and move through some of the prior year accounts which are still unsigned with a view to moving into 23-24. We're waiting on an announcement coming out towards the end of September. And as soon as we have that, we'll obviously talk that through with Nigel and Bill in terms of any of the implications for forward years audits. And obviously by the time we come through to the next committee, we should have a fuller picture of what that looks like. As a firm, we haven't made any firm decisions because as I say, we're still waiting on some of the guidance being finalised and being put through statute. So as I say, making progress with Bill and the team. No significant matters we need to report to the committee as at this date, and we'll look forward to bringing a substantive audit results report to the next committee, which should be in about 6 or 8 weeks' time.
Maybe I could ask Bill just to comment. Are you content with, I know this is all very delayed, and there's the question of consolidation for the group, but do you have any comment, Bill?
No, I mean, really, I think Adrian kind of said it all. I mean, from our perspective and also from the auditors, it's actually quite difficult revisiting something so late and then gaining evidence for something that's actually 18 months, 2 years old. So yeah, we're working through that and liaising with the auditors as we need to, having calls on specific items when that actually is more expedient than sending documents through. So yeah, we're just working our way through it and hopefully get through it as soon as possible.
Thank you. Yes. Well, one committee member, Ros Smith, is going to ask.
Thank you. Good evening, Adrian and Bill. So I'll put my glasses on so I can see you at a distance. Thank you for the update on the 21-22 accounts as such and where we are. Bill, you mentioned that you were having to look back and finding it difficult to find things that were being asked of you from EY. Is that due to staff numbers and time, or is this due to not being able to find records easily?
It's actually just due to time having passed and people having put together the original working papers so long ago and then having to refresh their memories. It's more that it kind of builds in that extra time delay to get answers to the auditors, whereas normally if we were if we were having an audit immediately after we prepare the accounts, it's all fresh in our mind.
I'm just a little bit concerned still to hear that. I mean, it's paperwork, it's going to be all electric and so forth. I mean, surely the filing system is good enough to retrieve and to answer questions from EY or queries that they have. I'm just a little bit concerned, Chairman, to hear that.
Would you like to respond, Bill?
Well, I think it's just normal. If you pick something up that you've worked on sort of 2 years ago, then it just takes a few minutes to kind of get your head back around it as to what the transactions were. I don't think it's anything unusual. It's not that we can't get hold of transactions. It's that we have to actually just get that into our headspace again.
Nigel, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, I just reiterate what Bill said. I mean, you know, I think as with anything, if I did something 5 minutes ago, I'd be able to trot it out quite quickly. If I've done something 12 months ago that I've you know, long since forgotten about, it's not about the filing system. The files are there, but I've got to dig it all back out again, refresh my memory as to what I did, and then relay that to the auditors, sort of thing. So I don't think it's a case of any concern, and certainly no concern from my part, basically.
Just interrupt,
It is.
Nigel. Sorry to be very rude and do
Yeah,
that
sure.
to you. But I was not suggesting it was. I think perhaps it was Bill's first answer that gave cause concern to me, because it sounded like it was taking longer than it should do. It was only a few minutes, as Bill says, and that's fine. I don't think we need to go over it and give the reasons again why you think something 5 minutes ago and something 5 or 6 or 7 or even 15 months ago.
Well, before asking another question, I mean, may I suggest that as a committee, we note the report from Adrian and hope against hope that the 6 weeks, which you did at one point mention, proves to be reality. So we're going to hold you to it, I hope. Please, Ros.
Chair, so that's 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Yes, it's early November. We decided not to go for Halloween evening to meet on the 31st of October. You never know what might happen to us all. Might be coming in costume. So we'll be meeting early November. But following that, Adrian, are you looking to sign off the accounts then before December, before Christmas, or is it going to be January?
No, so Chair, I think previously years we've had delegated authority in place. So I think that worked quite well from the point of view of the committee chair being able to kind of then work through to signing off the accounts as part of the delegated process. Obviously, if there was fundamental changes that have been made that needed to be explained through the committee, then it may be a decision for Nigel and the team to understand what they wanted to do in terms of that delegated authority and moving through to sign off. Obviously, if we were in a position to sign off and there was delegated authority in place, that's something that's been done in the past. And I know Bill has circulated significant changes that would have been identified as part of the audit to the committee if they wanted to do that. And we would obviously circulate anything that we need to do in terms of an audit results report. But I think the reporting we'll bring to the next committee should be a substantive audit results report, which would certainly give the committee a good indication of where we are, what our findings are, and also some of the initial conclusions in terms of our audit opinion. And also just to say that we're actually well progressed with the work on the value for money conclusion as well for 21-22. So we should be able to bring a substantive update to that to the next committee as well, which obviously is a significant part of the work we do too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other question which relates to the external audit, and maybe I could ask Nigel to comment, is on the latest email Nigel and I received from PSAA. And it's mentioned about, I think in your, maybe in papers or elsewhere, about the new fee structure and so on going forward. Maybe I could ask Nigel to comment, since some of us are interested in the budget round and it's clearly an important part of it. So Nigel, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the contracts are negotiated by PSAA on behalf of at least around 95-96% of all local authorities and in England and Wales, sort of thing. So they negotiate, they tender the services, and this is just another round of tendering the services with effect from next year's accounts, actually. In the case of Oxford City, and indeed I believe the county, actually EY, have been awarded the tenders for both of those audits. Interested to note that our colleagues in the other districts have different set of auditors, actually. In terms of sort of commentary on the actual the amount itself, I mean, like I say, PSAA run the process effectively. So if you're part of the tendering process, which we are, as I say, at least 96% of authorities in the whole country basically are, then you kind of accept that the price has been negotiated. Clearly, depending on the amount of work, and in the past, you know, EY have had to do substantial amounts of extra work on some of our accounts for various reasons. So the amount can vary basically once the final bill is put in. But hopefully that it won't vary too much from the original price that PSAA have negotiated with EY.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Adrian. If there are no more questions from the committee, maybe we can now proceed to the next agenda item, which is the internal audit report. First of all, I'd like to welcome those of you with long memories will remember when Gurpreet came, as Nigel said, first in short trousers, and he's progressed, and he's now going to be, we hope, from November, the partner that we will be working with. And although Yasmin's not here, it's nice to see how she's progressed as well. Maybe you can convey our congratulations to her as well. Thank you. So I know that you haven't really been responsible for these reports, but I think you're able to respond to questions on the internal audit. Yes?
Yes. Yep. So thank you, Chair, for your kind words, and glad to be back. And as I just mentioned, obviously I've been involved with Oxford since 2015, haven't for the last few years. So I've got a lot of knowledge around Oxford and obviously with ODS as well, which will be later in the paper. But I'm just going to be kind of finding my feet again. So from next committee onwards, particularly, I'll be fully involved in all of the reports. We have firstly the progress report in the pack. There is one report that we're bringing to you that's completed around planning services, which I'll pick up in a moment, and also our follow-up report. You'll see from the progress, there's the one review done now. There's quite a number of reviews in progress. So it does mean that this committee will likely have heavier agendas. I'll work with Yasmin on in the following year to try and spread that out a little bit further than it has been in this year. And then also in the progress report, we have a sector update and other elements which I'll come on to. The planning services report then starts on page 13 of the pack. So this is a review around planning services. It covers some of the core elements that we would have looked at around the policies, procedures in place, the design of arrangements around section 106 arrangements, as well as just kind of core testing of our applications raised, approved, signed off in the right way and recorded on the system. I'm pleased to say it's a substantial on design, a moderate on effectiveness, as there's one medium and a couple of low findings. And just to highlight those, the medium that's particularly driving the moderate on effectiveness is around section 106 agreements. And part of what we asked for is to see, can we see the original rationale, the calculations, but due to the historic nature of some of these, the council couldn't fully identify the audit trail. They can confirm the legal amount and the agreements that are in place, which is the key thing. And we've seen those payments are correct and valid, but to see some of the original documentation is something that they will be looking into, and something that we will follow up after this as well. But they are quite historic. And I would say that that's not dissimilar to what we may see in other local authorities. So Oxford wouldn't be an outlier in that regard. So for that reason, we've issued that medium and have a moderate on the effectiveness. As I mentioned, there's a sector update. I think the high level that you can take from this is that financial issues and challenges continue to hit the sector, and that's what a number of these sector updates focus on. Obviously, we've just heard from external audit, there are challenges with signing off accounts that continue to hit the sector. But apart from that, there's nothing else further to note on the progress report. So happy to take any questions on that before picking up the follow-up.
Do any of either of you have any questions for Gurpreet?
Just a quick one. So in the conclusion section, and it's also listed as an area of strength, the paper says the council has effective relationships with surrounding authorities. That's a phrasing I was a little surprised to be reading in light of the collapse of the Oxfordshire 2050 plan agreements. Wondered if that was reflected at all in the audit.
I think, as mentioned at the outset, I'm obviously less familiar with the particular report. I know some of the key areas here is around the council moving to what is the new changes with the validation strategy. Obviously, you work with Cherwell and a number of the other authorities as part of arrangements that are in place. I can take that away and have a look to see whether that was specifically considered. But if I'm honest, I don't know immediately off the top of my head, but I can look into that.
I mean, maybe just following up in similar vein, you mentioned, and the wording is, the government signalled an intention, top of page 14, to repeal the duty to cooperate. It's an intention, but this government keeps having intentions and they then forget them. I mean, what is the status of the intention?
Again, I'm unfamiliar on the current status of what that position is. Again, I can look into that. We will obviously, as part of follow-up, if there are any changes or key amendments, we can follow up on that. I'm not sure exactly where that is now up to. However, it says that it's likely to be replaced with a flexible alignment test, and we know the authority are already working towards some of that alignment in terms of the arrangements they have with neighbouring authorities already. So Oxford are proactively working towards that. In any case, I can check on where the actual guidance is up to, but I'm unfamiliar at this stage.
Ros.
Thank you. I note that you, in your conclusions, that you said actually the end of the conclusion, that it would be useful to have improvement with regard to the transparency of the calculation of section 106 fees. And I think somewhere else you mentioned SIL as well too. I presume that you would like to see more transparency. And I think the general Joe and J public would like to see more transparency. I'm quite often asked what section 106 money there is set aside, and also what SIL money there is to spend locally for improvements and things. And I know the council can move section 106 money to other areas. So one area would see the development and another area would see the benefit of that. So it's transparency on where the section 106 money is coming from and actually where it's spent, Chair, I would say, would be useful to know too, for full transparency, in fact, actually, so that Joe and J public can see that that money has been collected and then used, and where it's been used, more importantly too.
I should note, yes, well, in the management response that management have provided, it states in there on what is page, it states on page 15, the recommendation of creating publicly accessible summary of contributions will be investigated as part of a review of our SIL administrative system taking place this year. There's a due date of February 2024, which means this, we will follow that up in February and report back to this committee as to what's happened, what is now publicly available. Obviously, at that point, if you're not satisfied with what they've decided and what's publicly available, that can be challenged, but we will report to you what has been done back to this committee after February.
Right. Which meeting will that be, Chair?
Lucy, when's the meeting after February?
8th of April.
Oh, it's quite some time away then, isn't it? There's no way we can get an answer or...
We will follow it up then. Obviously, we formally report then in April. I'm sure if it was requested for something to come, via email to chair, etc., I'm sure we can do. But in April is when we would formally report it.
Chair, I respectfully say it would be nice to have it before April, if we could.
What I was going to suggest, because I can see it's relevant to the answer here, but I think it'd be useful, and for people, councillors, not just members of this committee, but actually to have a note from the planning team about the way in which section 106 contributions are allocated and dispersed, just for general use rather than specifically, and maybe that could be done ahead of time.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of light bulb moment. Could we invite David Butler to come to the next meeting in early November, perhaps, to just answer that question, given that we've just had the audit on his section? In fact, I was a bit surprised that he wasn't invited to this meeting. Perhaps that's-
Yes, by all means. Actually, in that context, could I just mention, in your conclusions, you mention, and I'm trying to find the word, you mention that Section 106 is a concern, but later on, when you're talking about why you give it a moderate assessment for control effectiveness, you mention validation strategy and the annual service plan, but they're nowhere outlined here. Is there a reason for that? Because, I mean, I was trying to understand why this was moderate. I can see Section 106 is one factor, but if there were three, I'm more persuaded.
So the approach with how we produce the reports is that if it's a medium finding, that's summarised within the progress report. The other two that you've mentioned were classified as low, and obviously to keep the papers within the size that they are. So at the top, it does say that there's one medium, which is the one we've talked about. Those two lows, therefore, we don't summarise. It is in the full report. So I think it's simply because of how the reports are summarised.
It's just, I think your very final paragraph on page 16, slightly ambiguous, because you mentioned the three together, Section 106 and so on. So you're saying they were just, what's the word, small, minor?
Yeah, so the validation one, for example, the policy had been approved. It wasn't documented as approved, it was done verbally, and therefore we had raised that as a low. It's there, it's in place, and so we've asked for that to be documented. So then there is a clear audit trail on that.
Thank you very much. So may we note this, we don't have to approve, we note this report. And let's go on then to follow up with recommendations, please. So would you like to introduce it briefly?
Yeah, so there's a follow-up here. Completion of prior year actions are looking pretty good. There's a high number of those completed. For the current year, there are more incomplete currently. We will focus on those for this discussion. So they're our business continuity, housing rents, change programme. I think for housing rents and change programme, what you'll see there is that we haven't been provided with the evidence to actually reach a conclusion on those ones. And so I need to, as part of my role, to investigate how the follow-up process is currently working, make sure that we have those there, because something needs to improve there if we're not receiving the information. So that's probably one for me to take away with Nigel. And on the business continuity disaster recovery, they've accepted that there's actually more time needed to complete this and set out that a test will be done in September. Given we're in September, we can't validate that yet, and we will obviously for the next time round. But it's the other three that I'd want to look into further as to why we've not received those responses. And as part of my role going forward, I'll try and make sure that that improves to understand what's happened there.
Right, Chair, just to be clear, that's the 22-23, the three medium recommendations, change programme and housing rents.
Correct.
That were incomplete. Okay, thank you. But they were due for completion in July 23?
Originally, and that's now been moved towards the end of the year. So I'd need to understand further as to what information is there, can we receive that, and then obviously validate then whether it's complete. Because the management provide a response to us, but unless we've seen actual evidence as to substantiate that, we won't deem it as finished. We've been verbally assured, but we need to see the evidence before we close it.
Thank you.
May I, following up, there's this curious comment, which is by internal audit, that whilst management, for two of them, whilst management deems this recommendation as complete, as you were mentioning, evidence wasn't provided to support this. It seems something flawed in the system if they thought it was complete and yet it was not. I don't know whether on this call, whether it's Nigel who could maybe comment on that. Is there something slightly awry in the system? Because it's a curious answer to see, because clearly they thought they'd done what they had to.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more curious when it's that same answer is made by two separate service heads, presumably independently. I totally support what Gurpreet has just said, basically. I mean, they are still flagged as in progress, and they will stay as in progress until the service manager basically provides the evidence, and I fully support that approach. So a little awry, I would say, Chair, but nevertheless, they are still marked as in progress. And so the auditor has done their job in saying that, well, until I see the evidence, it's not complete. I've written to both those service heads basically to ask what's the issue here, sort of thing. But as long as Gurpreet follows it up, as long as Gurpreet gets the evidence to his satisfaction, then that's the only time that will move away from in progress. So yeah, a little bit of work to be done, but at least the auditor, I think the internal audit process has done its job basically in that these two items are still incomplete.
No, thank you, and I'm glad you've got in touch with the relevant managers of these, or heads of these areas. If there are no more questions, comments, may we note this report, and thank you very much on that. And I'm glad to see both Catherine Pridham and Simon Howick here from ODS. Can you introduce briefly your report? It is nice and brief, actually, Catherine. And then I wondered whether we could maybe get, I know it wasn't the same bit of BDO that did your audit, but it might be good just to see if Gurpreet has anything to say in response. So, Catherine, can you introduce it briefly?
Yeah, of course. As in previous years, because of the small size of our internal audit engagement, BDO are not able to offer an overall audit opinion for the work they've undertaken for ODS. But if I just talk through briefly what they have covered, namely contract management, GDPR, and a risk maturity advisory review. The original plan included data input controls, but we have delayed that to 23-24. In addition, BDO were finalising, very importantly, their financial reporting controls work relating to 21-22, which was the review of the manual controls put in place during the QL implementation, which was then followed up with supplementary assurance by ODS internally to satisfy the board and obtain sign-off of the 21-22 accounts by the external auditors, which I'm very pleased to say has now finally been achieved, which is great news. Limited assurance was provided by the contract management audit, and this has been discussed with the shareholder, and action has been taken in this regard, and recommendations are being followed up by the internal auditors and the audit committee. Moderate assurance from GDPR audit, which was essentially highlighting a need to tidy up the consistency of information asset registers and make sure defined records of processing activities are in place. And then very pleasingly, today the audit committee was looking at the risk maturity advisory review. We had a workshop last year with BDO looking at the way the audit committee could improve its performance. And one of the areas that they said we should focus more on was risk assurance. So there are 5 levels of maturity, increasing from naive, aware, defined, managed, and enabled. And very pleasingly, ODS were given risk maturity levels of defined for governance and monitoring and reporting, and managed for risk assessment, risk mitigation, and continuous improvement. So that I think was a good result, and they gave us some useful guidelines about what we could do to improve things even further. So that was useful. As highlighted in this report, there's obviously additional non-internal audit assurance available. We completed the OCC governance questionnaire as forwarded to us by OCC. We have external accreditations, which we have listed here. And there's also the work of our quality assurance team, who do a lot of internal audit activity themselves. And we have policies in place, such as whistleblowing, money laundering, etc. So that's really an outline of the work that has been done by the audit committee. Welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comment, Gurpreet, or maybe comment, if there are questions, you can take them away. That might be fairer to you, since you didn't work on this. Okay.
No comments.
Thanks. Do you have any questions, Ros?
I'm looking at page 35 under governance and risk management assurance. Thank you for the report, Catherine. It mentions the QL implementation problems and the need to ensure the flow of accurate financial information. And it says it's pleasing to see that many respondents noted that once properly implemented, QL was an effective resource. Is that still your feeling, given that we are still seeing changes and updates being made further on in our deliberations this evening? Reports, we have reports of more updates being done for QL. And of course, the last bullet point that you've got there, other areas of concern included staff recruitment and the need for more streamlined processes. Absolutely could agree with the staff recruitment. We know that in the whole of Oxford and Oxfordshire, staff recruitment is a major problem for organisations and businesses. But I just wondered about the need for more streamlined processes, and I'm just wondering what that actually meant, what by streamlined processes. So a couple of questions and a comment there, Chair.
Okay. With regards to QL, as with any piece of software, I would expect that there would be ongoing updates to it, so that in itself wouldn't change my opinion about this. Certainly one of the most important update, which was the sales order processing, once that was updated, it actually meant that the the revenue streams end up in the right company without a need for manual analysis. So that it is very good to see in place. Certainly the internal control questionnaires, I was really pleased to see that after all of the heartache that we've been through, that the people that are using the system on the ground were saying that it did give them benefits. So in terms of the analysis of information that they've got. So no, I think to answer your question, no, my opinion has not changed just because there are further updates to QL going on. With regards to other areas of concern and the need for more streamlined processes, we do actually have like an efficiency program underway. So we've found 1.1 million of savings. The next part of that efficiency program is to go through the processes that we have in all the areas of the business, looking for further efficiencies. So although I haven't seen every individual's response to this, I imagine that the focus for this is coming through as a result of the reviews. So it's being pushed out to the organisation as something that they need to look at. And then I think the responses reflect that. Simon, I don't know if there's anything more you'd like to say on that, or on the staff recruitment issue, in fact.
Thanks, Catherine. Chair, if I may, very, very briefly, and I'll pick up.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start with a little bit briefly more on QL. I mean, ODS were sort of, in a way, early adopters. So we've been through an extensive implementation of QL, and I can only speak from the ODS perspective. The system's working fine now. I don't know what else is on your agenda later. I don't know how the council is getting on with its part of the implementation, but certainly from our point of view, it is now an effective tool that is enabling us to do our job better. Yeah, I mean, what Catherine's referring to there, that annual governance statement, the feedback from the various leaders in our business, recruitment challenges, as you've commented on, are apparent for us as they are for other businesses. In the past, we've had problems over drivers, but I think they have lessened now. I think our incentives to refer people have worked. So we always have pockets of problems, not least the building trade as well. But generally speaking, it's not creating a business critical issue at the moment. And then, as Catherine says, I think it's a good thing that our leaders in the business are showing some frustrations about processes, and they want to cut out more waste and do something about it. So we're very focused on that to be a more efficient business.
Sorry, apologies, Catherine. Was it 1.2 million or 1.1 million efficiencies you've found?
1.1 million.
And what sort of period of time is that? Over the last year? Is it looking backwards or?
Yes, and that's an ongoing. It's over a 2-year period, and it's an ongoing benefit. So it's not just a one-off efficiency; it's enduring.
And that's been found. Those efficiencies of 1.1 have been found in these 2 years.
They've been found, and they are in line with the expectations as agreed with the shareholder. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could just first of all make a comment, and I think Ros is well aware, we agreed at the last meeting to push the recruitment and retention into the Q3, replacing the private rented sector review in the internal audit plan, reflecting our concerns. Now, as far as I know, this won't cover ODS, but I guess the issues are very similar, whether it's the council companies or whether it's the council itself. So I think it's a very timely review, and I'm glad we made that change. I had one question, maybe they're related. In the second paragraph of your statement, Catherine, you say the internal audit plan was amended because of all the FOI requests that you'd clearly been getting, which related, it sounds, to contract management. And contract management was where the limited assurance was given. Is there any special reason why this blew up in terms of FOI requests? I imagine the limited assurance and the FOI were related. Is that fair?
I think with or without the focus on, it was scaffolding, the focus of the FOI, but I don't think that had any bearing on the limited. The issues that arose would have been found absolutely regardless of that. I mean, the high level issues really were around the status of the contracts register, which, we're going back in history here, but, it wasn't clear to the auditors when they were looking at it as which entry is related to contracts as opposed to simple one-off spending, which contracts are currently live. They were expecting us also to have contract owner details, although from a kind of personal data perspective, we don't actually think that should be published on the contracts register, because it is accessible to many on the website. And then there was also points made around contract management and KPIs as well, having adequate KPIs for the contracts in place. So I don't really think, to be fair, that the additional work in looking specifically at the FOIs made any difference. The scope of the audit would have covered the findings anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions, comments? I'm not quite sure what we're meant to do. I think we thank you and note the report. And I don't think, other than maybe if Gurpreet, when he goes away, has a chance to think of, does he have any further comments on this report? I think we thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now go on agenda item 7, the annual governance statement. And I assume, Tom, is it you who will be introducing it?
Yes, it is,
That's
Chair.
correct. Would you like to introduce it briefly? I suppose the main question we will have is it substantially different from the one last year?
Thank you, Chair. As you know, Council's obliged to ensure it has a sound system of internal control, which promotes and facilitates effective exercise of its functions and the achievement of its aims and objectives, and that it ensures the financial and operational management of the authority is effective, and includes effective arrangements for the management of risk. So this annual governance statement appended to the report reflects the review that's been undertaken in consultation with the head of paid service, the chief exec, the monitoring officer and the chief finance officer. You'll have seen that there are no significant issues raised in the report, and the council's auditors are able to provide moderate assurance that there's a sound system of internal control designed to meet the council's objectives, and that the controls are being applied consistently. The annual governance statement for the year 21-22 reference planned work to improve visibility on whether risk reporting has been completed, improvements to project documentation and standardization of risk registers, and increased training to support the process. These matters were actually addressed during the year 22-23, and the mechanisms have been working more positively. You should just note that there's a reference in paragraph 1.7 of the statement to an action plan. In fact, there isn't an action plan. I understand there was an action plan for the previous year and the year before that, but there is no action plan for this year, and that paragraph will need to be deleted.
Thank you. I will then ask the committee if they have any questions. Ros?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I found it quite interesting, actually. Though many people find audit terms very dry. I don't. Sorry, I shouldn't apologise for that, should I really? Somebody has to read these reports properly. I noticed that the council strategy is mentioned, actually, obviously, in the report, and its key priorities and specific actions and milestones the council will undertake. And looking against the progress against this, against agreed key performance indicators. Perhaps I'm being a bit naive, but with the council has invested a lot of money in some key areas where we have an area of deprivation, namely, say, Blackbird Leeds, which is absolutely right. I just wondered what monitoring was done of the outcomes of the big capital spends that go with the priorities for the council, supporting thriving communities and enabling an inclusive economy. Is there some indicators, or is there some monitoring that shows the outcome against the monies that have been spent on the projects that have been undertaken to support thriving communities? So in other words, when they have a key project that is undertaken, for instance, there was a new swimming pool built in Blackbird Leeds, and the Temple Cowley one was taken down, against a lot of local wishes, actually, too. But Am I making myself clear? I really want to know if we're showing value for money, I suppose, really, in the spend that we're making and in the strategy that we've got, showing that we are making a change. The council is making a change to people's lives in that particular area, that they're spending a lot of money, capital spend and revenue.
Do you have such a summary cost benefit analysis?
I'm going to have to say that I'm going to take that one away and come back to the committee on that because I don't know the answer. I'm sorry. I think Nigel wants to say something though.
Apologise if I put you on the spot there, Tom. I do apologise.
No, not at all. Not at
Long,
all. I
rambling
will go away.
question to you.
Nigel?
Yeah, the area I would probably point to is the development board, which is chaired by the executive director of development. So all capital monitoring, capital projects, the commencement of capital projects, the monitoring of those projects, and also post-implementation reviews are undertaken by officers within that report, actually. So any sort of monitoring that is undertaken it goes through that board basically and is signed off by both the exec director as the chair and a number of other heads of service who are on that board, actually. We don't, I think it's fair to say we don't do in post implementation on every project. I seem to remember on Blackbird Leys we did that one specifically probably quite some time ago, actually, given the sort of high profile nature of it, actually. But anything that is done in that space, basically.
So are those reports available, Nigel, for ordinary members to read? That I don't think they've gone to cabinet. I don't think I've seen a report like that go to cabinet.
Yeah, they would be mainly through you, Chair. They'd be mainly internal reports, so they are discussed at officer level, and we would look at if there's any particular issues that have gone wrong on the project, if there are any project overruns or overspends. We would have that discussion at that board, basically. So I can, if required, can probably dig out a number that have gone to that board, and I've no reason why they can't be circulated, actually.
I'm not making myself clear. Sorry. That would be great to see that sort of information. I have to read that sort of report. What I was asking for really is social value. You know, have these large spends of money, both capital and revenue, going into a certain area to make it a thriving community actually change something? Have we actually seen a move away from large swathes of families being generation after generation dependent on the welfare state as such, on benefits? So breaking that cycle of dependence on benefits, have we seen some social movement to improving the families and seeing thriving communities? Do you understand what I'm asking now? I don't think I think this is something that is I'm trying to articulate it. Perhaps I'm not articulating it enough. I know there are overruns and underruns and things on projects, and do we get value for money? But I'm talking about a different sort of value, something that the council has got as a priority, about thriving communities and actually showing that those communities have got a better state in life because of the money that the council has directed towards it, rather than putting that money, could be Section 106 money, getting back to this, or SIL money, that has come from a development elsewhere in the city and gone into another area that needs it and has been identified as the need. But have we, as a council, actually seen a thriving community change round, lesser dependent on benefits, and, as we said, a thriving community?
Nigel?
Well, I'll probably go back to what Tom answered initially, basically. I'm not aware of a specific report on those sorts of grounds which you're illustrating there, actually. So I mean, clearly there's the review of all our priorities, basically, and how that affects the community. That's done at the end of each financial year against the corporate plan. But in terms of the detail that you're seeking, I'm not sure that there is one central place where that is all drawn together basically and reported back up through cabinet or council actually. So it may well be taken that way, but I would see that as a more composite report, and if there was one, it would be done by a number of officers across the authority actually. So I'm not aware that that report has been done in the past.
Imogen, would
I
you?
was just, I suppose, going to point towards. I was going to point towards the work the community wealth building officer does around social value, and maybe that's the team that has a say there. But I would separate it out from ideas around benefits, because that seems to be more looking at economic returns, and maybe a report on a swimming pool wouldn't necessarily have any impact on savings on benefits. I can't see the link there, but in terms of social value, I think maybe our community wealth building officer maybe does some of that work.
Could I suggest, because it's a big question, and obviously it's very important and interesting in terms of the benefits of what the council's doing, I'm going to suggest, since I don't think we're going to resolve it here, but and you know, there is central government, county as well as city influences on different parts of the city. I think it might be good if we could suggest one or two tangible projects which have got significant capital investment or whatever, and then maybe to ask if they could be made into case studies so we could see in a tangible way and try to disentangle the different factors that have affected it. Because I think as a general exercise, I don't think we have the resources or probably the ability to do it. But is that acceptable if we chose and maybe suggested? It'd be useful if, for example, in the budget round, but it's too late for that. But it'd be useful to be able to suggest one or two tangible projects. Is that acceptable?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm glad to say. Yes, I mentioned the swimming pool. There are a couple of projects. I'm just thinking of one that's just happening at the moment with the county, and that's putting, I think, it's £100,000 into a new youth, which is great. That's lovely. We put, you know, over the years, money has gone into youth projects time and time again in Blackbird Leeds. But it hasn't gone into other areas. There are deserts within the city area where there is no youth provision and hasn't been for decades. So when I have young families saying, well, we haven't got anything for our teenage families, and yet, you know, there is more money going again. They've already had a new swimming pool, now they're having youth facilities. When are we going to see something in another area of the city that has a desert?
So could I suggest, because
so I'd love to see something like that.
Yes, I mean, and maybe what one could do is do a comparative piece of work in different parts of the city if something is focused on one area and not on another, and see the outcomes, which will take time. But I'm going to suggest that rather than discuss it further here, that we propose one or two specific areas of council involvement and to see where they're not citywide and to see the outcomes. Is that okay? And I would invite committee members to suggest them. Not many, one or two. Okay, thank you. Just generally, I think I've said it when Emma was presenting. If you look at it, the governance framework, which starts at page 42, it's section 5. I would always commend this to councillors because it's actually the nicest summary of what we do as a council in a fairly compact place. I mean, I really find this useful because that answers lots of questions I think we probably get asked. Maybe we could extract it and sort of highlight it elsewhere because, as I say, I think it should be commended as a rather nice summary of what the council does as a strategy. Any other questions, or may we approve the statement? And okay, and then is that accepted? I take it to be yes. And then we come on, it's an interesting title in the agenda, investigatory or something powers, but anyhow, the regulation of that, and I assume, I assume that you, Tom, are going to introduce that as well.
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you. So you'll recall that I believe it was last meeting, the committee approved a refreshed regulation of investigatory powers, surveillance policy and procedure, and that it requested a couple of flowcharts to be appended to the procedure, setting out the processes, I think, for applying for a warrant. And I'm sorry, I don't know what the other one is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but if essentially these are the procedures, the flowcharts which are to be appended to the policy, and you're being asked to approve that.
Chair, if I may, as being the councillor that asked for this, can I say huge thank you? This is just so much easier, I think, for everybody to see and understand. When you say RIPA, a lot of people don't understand what it means, but this shows exactly how the process has gone through. And I think for anybody that's new to the council, this is very useful having a flow chart like this. So thank you very much indeed. It's good to see. Thank you.
Thank you. So we not only approve, we thank the preparation of the. I wasn't here at the last meeting, but I'm glad that everyone is happy. So thank you very much. So now Rocco, who's been very quiet until now, we're coming to the ICT work programme. So would you like to introduce it, please, Rocco?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you very much. And no, I've been listening with interest to colleagues and their items. So first of two papers, this one is an update for the committee regarding the portfolio of projects within the council that have ICT involvement. And I believe, if correct me if I'm wrong, that the committee wanted to understand what we were doing to manage the prioritization and the delivery of over 120 projects currently on the list or on the work plan for ICT. So the report itself effectively runs through the challenges that we have from a perspective of managing such a large portfolio of projects, and particularly managing the demand, the capacity, and obviously the prioritization of those projects. We took upon ourselves to meet with all the heads of service from across the council to review with them the projects that were on their list of work to be carried out. We ran through those lists individually and with head of service colleagues, we prioritized those lists on an individual basis. Following that piece of work, we then brought together all those individual prioritization lists and we consolidated them into a single central one, which we have placed on a database, which is regularly updated now. That holds the complete list of all projects at that moment in time. They have been prioritized. They were then shared collectively around all the heads of service to ensure that the combined priorities met with their approval, which it did. So we now have in a single place a consolidated view and timeline of all 120 projects, which are realistically deliverable, subject obviously to new projects. And that's the big challenge now, maintaining this moving forward, because on a regular basis, we get new requirements, new requests coming through from all parts of the organization, each with its own priorities. So we've had to put in place processes, forgive me, processes to ensure that the work that we've carried out is not lost as a one-off operation. To that end, the report reflects on the fact that there are 5 proposals that we put forward. These went to the Organisational Change Board, to managers, heads of service, and to CMT, and they're brought to your attention for noting and for any comments you wish to make. In essence, just in summary, the recommendations that we put forward and that were agreed with it by officers within the council were that from that point in time, any and all proposals for new work from any part of the organisation would have to go through the Organisational Change Board, which is currently chaired by Tom Hook. The proposals would have to be reviewed by colleagues and by ICT in particular, where there were ICT elements prior to it going to the board, where it would be considered on the basis of its merits and a decision as to whether or not to proceed taken at that point. Further requirements were that all projects should have capital, and where there's an impact on the revenue budgets, revenue identified before they are taken forward. And the role of the Organisational Change Board in that circumstance is not only to review the proposals as to whether they go forward or not, but also to review the priority of that project versus others, and if necessary, adjust the work plan of all the other projects to accommodate that, reflecting on whether there's a requirement for additional capacity or additional funding to actually deliver that. So we put in place effectively governance to manage this moving forward so we don't lose the benefits we've gained by prioritising. And that's the essence of the report, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Could I just, before inviting questions from the committee, I'm going to ask one very petty question, but it's I'm going to ask it. Way down the list at 87 is something called Meta Street that you considered to be high priority, but it doesn't have a start date. I mean, everything else that's high priority does. And I just wondered if that was an omission. That's just a minor point. You don't need to answer now.
I'm happy to answer that, Councillor.
Oh, okay.
So the reality of the report, as I mentioned, is that it's in continuous change. So at the time of preparing the report, the Meta Street application had only just appeared on the radar. So as soon as we heard about it, it went on the report. Until such time as we're presented with a proposed start and end date, obviously we can't put one on there. So there are a number of projects that have been identified and therefore captured on the report, but haven't yet got the detail. As of this precise moment, we do have the detail. The report itself has been updated, or the database has been updated with that information. So as I said, it's a living document. So unfortunately, at the time of producing it, we did not have that data, but we do now.
Thank you, that's very clear. The other thing which is maybe more relevant, especially thinking in terms of the budget and all the rest, and you did mention capital and revenue implications, would it be possible to add a column rather than going into very great detail, because I know these things are not necessarily final, just to indicate by cost category or something like that, sizable, moderate, small. I mean, you've got loads of things that are high priority. And I'd just be interested to get a sense as to, are some of these fairly minor cost items with low revenue implications, or are they sizable? Could you do that? Would that be terribly difficult to do? I'm not asking you to be absolutely set in concrete, but I think it would help to, I mean, it's a wonderful way of setting this out. You've answered, I think, some of our requests, but I wondered if you could give that extra bit of colour to it.
Absolutely. Where on the actual database itself, where we know that that there is already capital apportioned, we've already got that on the system. Where there are new projects, obviously, we don't necessarily have that, but I'm more than happy to, wherever possible, put that information in terms of that sort of, I will do it as a range of numbers. So it sort of goes from very small, 1 to 10,000. I'll try and align to the Constitution and the numbers that are laid out there in terms of procurement process, so you get a clear idea. So a short answer is yes, I can do that quite easily.
I think that would be very helpful. Thank you. Are there any other?
Thank you. Thank you for the report in detail and the recommendations. And this is quite a good change, I think, actually. But I was surprised it was 120 or over 120 projects all going on in one time. Obviously, they're not all happening at one time because they have high and low and medium priority. But as you said, a majority of them are high. I just wondered, I was just looking on page 72 here about the recommendations for considering or agreeing or noting by CMT are the following. And just noticed on C, the chair of OCB, that's the Organisational Change Board, has delegated authority from CMT to make the final decision on whether to proceed with the proposal, relative priority and the timeline for delivery. Is that for each of the 120 projects or so that you have plus going? Or is that just for a priority, a project that comes in that just needs an immediate decision on it, where it goes? I wasn't quite clear on those recommendations, Chair, if you read them. And I've actually put a note here at the bottom here, where is the member overview? So we've talked about the Organisational Change Board, but we don't have members of the council on that. It's very much officer-led. And given the hiccups that we've had in the past with some IT, we just wondered where the member overview. That's my first question, if I could, Chair.
Over to you, Rocco.
No, happy to do that. Two questions, I believe, Councillor, so I'll give you two answers. So your first question regarded whether the chair has overarching powers of decision on the existing 120. So the answer to that is no. This is forward-looking in terms of responsibility. Those projects are already, the 120 are already approved and moving forward. To your point there about member oversight, the OCB has a procedure called the front door of change, which has a relatively light touch outline business case form, as well as having the involvement of ICT in preparing that form, where the responsible officer considers that it has sufficient importance for, to be noted by members. It will also have the reference to the member there. The expectation is that this board will only in exceptional cases propose that the project does not go forward. And it does not have, perhaps this was not clear in the report, my apologies, it does not have absolute authority to stop a project in its tracks. It has the authority to send a project back for further detail, if you will. So if an officer presents a proposal and it's not funded, for example, we would not want that to go through, so it can be pushed back. But in no case can the Organisational Change Board nor the chair actually stop a project completely. They can simply question its viability at that point and send the author back to provide further information. I can give an example, if you wish, of such a circumstance.
Please do.
So on a couple of occasions, we've had proposals put forward by officers for new business systems, small ones. And we've identified that there are already existing business systems that can do what the officer requires or what the department requires, which they may or may not have been aware of. So in those cases, we do not approve proceeding with that system because there is already one that the council owns that will do that. So that is one of those circumstances where the board or the chair would say, this can't proceed like this, you've got to go back and as a minimum, make an assessment of whether your requirements can be addressed by that existing system. So that's a typical example of where we would push back on the request.
Thank you.
There are lots of acronyms in here. One that I picked up was on line 28. QLX, Versa, the 2 A's, Customer Portal, CBL and MRI, new project. It's got a project stage of 00, which I guess it hasn't started yet, and yet it says in delivery. And I just sort of wondered how those two went together, because it says 00 new project, and yet it says it's in delivery. And really, I need to understand actually about in delivery and in progress. You know, what is the difference between those two?
So,
I understand.
no,
Sorry.
absolutely. So we may have a new project which is actually going immediately into being deployed, shall we say, or being set up. Whereas we may have a new project which hasn't started, or we may have a project which is new and is in progress in terms of people are working on either the business requirements or doing the procurement and so forth. So if I may, I'll take a moment of the committee's time. Projects have a life cycle, which starts with an idea and ends with the solution going live, being handed over and so forth. In between that, there is only a proportion of that time which is actually building or setting up or configuring the system. There is a long preamble before that, which is identifying the business requirements, the technical requirements, preparing the procurement, doing the bidding and so forth. So all that pre-project stage is the stage where something may be in progress. Once the contract is signed and the product is ready to be set up and configured, it goes into delivery. So it's effectively an internal measure of where we are in that life cycle between I have an idea and the system is live.
Can I make a suggestion? Rather than perhaps in saying in progress, maybe it's being used or in use rather than in progress, because for me, progress means that it's a project that's still continuing to be finished and not finished as such. But I think what I'm getting from you is it's actually being used. So the next contact centre replacement procurement, it says customer service centre in progress. And that is back in May. Oh no, sorry, it's on due date in May of next year. So that's
so the
in
work
progress. But so what's the
sorry, so the work to actually no, I beg forgive me, Casa. So the project is not, the system is not live yet. The work is in progress to procure the solution, after which it will go into the delivery phase, which is the building of. So it's in progress means the part before we actually get delivery of the system to set up.
May I suggest that this could be resolved by having a note at the end? I mean, I think we all like the development of this list. I think it answers many of our requests, but maybe you could just have a summary of how you understand these terms, and then at least we can refer back to it. You don't have to change the words, you just have a summary somewhere as the final footnote. Could I also ask one thing? If it were internal audit, we know, and you will have heard, we look at recommendations in progress, and in particular, we're looking at ones which have missed their initial deadline, their initial due by date. There it's done pretty much by quarters, which I think makes sense. Here you are doing it, at least in terms of starts, by quarter. Do you have a procedure for formal reviews of projects that don't meet their due by date? And maybe not, some of these are very specific, but in terms of month or something by which they'd be delivered. Is there such a process? If not, it'd be quite interesting. I mean, maybe not for everybody, but at least to know it existed.
So there is a quarterly review which has begun following on from the agreement of heads of service. There is going to be a quarterly review with each service area of their projects. We currently already carry out one with financial services and Nigel Kennedy, where we sit down with the team and review the progress on their projects and make any modifications and adjustments to the timelines, because with 120 projects, it's very fluid. So in that sense, there is a quarterly review with heads of service around their projects. On the individual project basis, that's really down to the business owner and the project manager as to whether they are actually flagging that. It's tracked internally on the database, so we do know what's late and not late. As you said, Councillor, it's not only tracked by quarter, but each project, when we do get a start and end date, we actually put the calendar date in as well, so we have that level of granularity. But effectively, in terms of governance and control, the quarterly heads of service meetings are those that will review progress on the individual service areas projects.
Are there any other questions? Well, I mean, we're coming on to one which will be in confidential session, but I want to thank you very much. I think this was a very well introduced, outlined report, and I think things look much better than I think they did in the past when we weren't quite sure where ICT was going. So thank you very much. So we're meant to, can we resolve to note the report and confirm we are satisfied with the approach? Yes, I take unanimity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go on. This will be quick. Agenda item 10 is really just to review, and I assume agree with it. Have you got it on page 95? I think it's already been agreed, so thank you very much. So that is done, and we hope to God that we, if not by 30, well, I'm not quite sure whether we'll get by 31st of October, the external auditor statement of accounts. That should change.
Yes, change it to the 8th of November. 8th of November.
Yes.
31st of October date needs to change, Chair.
Yes. So I'm going to suggest that we note that because it's not going to be by the end of next month. Any other changes? I think the other ones are less fraught. You know, they're more realistic. Okay, so with that one change, that's agenda item 10. Dates and times of the next meetings, I think we will note that, and I hope it's in our diaries. I'm going to suggest that we go now just quickly to the minutes of the previous meeting, and then we go into confidential session. Is that okay? So we'll go to agenda item 14. I happen not to be here. Imogen chaired it. Are there any questions, comments on the minutes? I have one correction, although I wasn't even there, which is Scott Warner was there, and he's not mentioned as being present. So he can be added. Anything else that occurred to you from the minutes? Okay. So with that, we approve the minutes with that one addition of Scott Warner's name. So I suppose I have to read all of this, and I'm looking at Lucy because we need now to be ready to go into confidential session. And is it, we have to look at exempt information pursuant to paragraph 7 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. If the committee wishes to discuss matters relating to the information set out in the attached report, which is number 13 on the agenda, we are going to have to pass a resolution to exclude the press and public from the meeting. So do I have the support of the committee? We do. Thank you. So